Hi, Ida. Thank you so much for being on the Performance Podcast. It's super exciting to have you as the originator and OG of the Femtech world, literally creating the word Femtech, being the founder of Clue. And before going into that part of the story, I would love to have a little bit of your background, how you grew up and how you got into motorbikes and then Femtech.
Well, thank you for having me here. I've also been following your work over the years. I'm excited that we get to talk. Yeah, I grew up with my mother and father and my brother. And my parents, they had this idea to go travel the world on motorcycles. And the first time when I was 1 year old, they went through South America. And so that became their livelihood. They wrote books and gave lectures about their story. And so we went on 4 long trips as I grew up. I loved it. I loved seeing the world. I loved it because I had my older brother right next to me, and he was my best friend and my teacher. I also then, I like motorcycles, so I ended up having a motorcycle touring agency with my dad for 5 years, and also did a lot of traveling on my own. Spent 2 years traveling around the desert areas of America, so I love the desert. And then eventually, I had this really big question in me of like, why has there been so little family planning innovation since the pill came out? And I think having traveled around the world was part of that question. You know, I've seen women's lives really all over the planet. And I think I sort of in a very intuitively way understood that women need to have agency over their childbearing for societies to be healthy and for the planet to be thriving. I needed something. I tried to be on the pill, it didn't work well for me. And so it was this sense of like, I need it, but the world needs this, this thing. So I wanted to try and build a new type of birth control. That was like my starting brain for Clue. And then I then kind of started, and then somewhere along the line, I understood that hardware is really hard. My co-founder at the time, Hans Pfaff, he said, well, we should build a period tracking app because that's a great way to start building a user base and kind of being in the space. And that was very smart because then some years later, we understood that we could probably get to the same result without the hardware, but just using math and data. So founded the company Clue, and I did that with 4 guys, which was maybe unexpected, but I'm a big believer that we need to build companies in femtech by really diverse teams, and we need to include men. And I was happy and grateful that these men were truly interested in caring about this space. So we did that, and then fast forward 10 years, we eventually got FDA clearance as the world's first all digital type of birth control. So for me, that was a really important milestone. The irony of it all is that it's not actually in the market because of lots of different things that has nothing to do with the product itself or regulation for that matter. So it's not currently available, but I hope someday it will be again, because I think, there are 200 million people, women without access to birth control. And so we built Clue, and over the years, the company, of course, changed many times. And eventually, I felt that other people could take it forward in ways that I couldn't do. I was also maybe a bit tired, I think, after having been CEO for many years. I was happy to see somebody who were better than I was in the kind of things that Clue needed at that time. And it felt amazing that I could hand over to super smart people that I really trusted. And that was actually really, really, I felt so rich, because I started the company with nothing like you do when you found a company. I had a Post-it note that I had on my wall. Like that was literally the beginning. And then 10 plus years later, I could hand over like a whole company to somebody. So I was like, yeah, that felt good.
Yeah, that's amazing. And going back to the very first days of Clue, so you had a hardware. Can you tell me more about this idea of the hardware pre-app?
Yes.
I think everyone knows about the app, but not many people know that there was a hardware originally.
Yeah, well, it was an idea for hardware. We never actually managed to build a hardware. I wanted to build a little home diagnostics that could measure hormones in saliva. And the idea was that instead of taking hormones to avoid becoming pregnant, you just need to know exactly where in the cycle you were, so that these few days where you can get pregnant, you could use a condom. And I wanted it to be something, super fast. But I still have the sense of like, oh, the phone is such an intimate device. I didn't have a smartphone yet myself. And I had no money that I could buy like an expensive iPhone. That was not going to happen. But I still had this sense of like, oh, this is a really perfect interface for having this data around your cycle and your health. And then I would just have some little, box where you could spit on something, you put it into the reader, and it would, effortlessly communicate with your phone. So it really was a question of how do I get this data out of the body and into a phone? And we worked on it for, I think, 4 years or maybe more, but eventually realized that we were not the right team to do that because it really was, we were kind of a two-headed monster. At that point, investors were not used to companies doing both.
Hardware, for
So the reality and the practicalities of it was challenging, but also we started understanding that we could get to the same without the hardware, which from a user perspective, of course, is, easier, simpler. So that was very exciting, actually. But I think having this hardware component early in our story gave us a sense of identity that was quite important for us as a company. It made us very science oriented, and it made us, I don't know, we gave ourselves a flavor that felt kind of serious and like sciencey, or I don't know, maybe you relate to that being a data company too. But because as you mentioned, when we started, there was not a sense of this being a sector or this being a thing. There was a bit sort of a period tracking app. It was like, people would kind of wrinkle maybe their noses a little bit. Like it wasn't seen as something super exciting. But then having this hardware component made us a little bit more exciting, maybe. Yeah.
And can you tell me a bit more about that? Because even today, when I'm talking to investors or people about women tracking their symptoms, very often they say like, why would they track it? I say, because things change all the time in our body. It's really relevant. And believe it or not, but we do actually not remember when we're going to have our periods. It's like, it's actually. And so I was a user of Clue for many, many years. And just knowing that my periods might happen, it was already a huge news. And so can you tell me more about like the conversations you had, probably mostly with men? I think women can understand the value of knowing when they're going to have their periods and other symptoms. But how were the conversations early on that? Like, how did you convince them that it was worth it?
That's a really good question. Well, I would say we kind of bootstrapped or had some angel money until we launched the product. And then we got good traction. And I think the numbers told the story. Say, well, there's actually a lot of women that find this really helpful. And then we would, I guess, in these pitch meetings, we would talk about, well, it being kind of the biggest category in fitness and health, or maybe the second one after running. I don't remember our pitch exactly anymore, but like, hey, like it's actually a really big type of product. And then we would say, I think I always try to explain it from a really practical, like the practicality of like being prepared for your period, but maybe also being able to see conditions like health problems. And we would talk about longitude data being a really interesting data set. And we would talk about the period being one of the vital health signs. So sort of a medical angle to it. I don't know. My experience was always that if you had an hour with an investor, like usually by the end of that hour, they'll be glad. They would go like, oh, that's really interesting. Like they would get it, but it took a lot of time and effort. And I think a lot of femtech companies today still need that. Maybe it's not administration, because maybe somewhat culture has like understood that is an important part of women's lives. But then if it's, hormonal health or menopause or conditions like endometriosis, there's still a lot of education that goes on in these pitch meetings where founders have to explain things that if you felt it on your own body, is like, duh, it's a no-brainer. Like these are really, really central things to our well-being, to our big life decisions and so on. Oh yeah, I also remember talking about like how female health sits at the center of so many things, like our identity, our sexuality, our health, our work lives, our relations. Like it's kind of a central data set actually.
Yeah. And also like all our bodies, all our like our digestive system, everything that is women related. I mean, everything that is in the female body that is generally accepted in medicine, being both for men and women, actually should be looked at with a female lens. Like the way we digest changes with the menstrual cycle. And I think it's just now the last few months where doctors are upskilled, like female specificities and how hormones change everything in the body, which is a bit crazy. It's only now. And how, because Femtech now is a completely like normal word used by everyone, understood by everyone. But how did you come up with that word that really stuck in people's brain and now it's such a commoditized word? And also how did you define it at the beginning, and how did you see that word evolving over time?
Well, it started because I was invited to be on a panel at TechCrunch Disrupt in San Francisco in 2016. It was the first time they were doing a panel on female health. It was in the morning after the big party, but still, it was there. And I was looking to see who the other panelists were and what they were building. And I was looking at how they were describing what they were doing and how they were describing themselves, because I knew how hard it was to try and describe what we were. So I was curious to see how they're doing, because they were kind of, neighboring fields. And the language was just like all over. And I thought, what if we had one common label for this category of things? And I remember running around at this conference trying to find like various entrepreneurs doing something that was somewhat neighboring and be like, hey, I have this idea. Do you think that, would you be comfortable if you were like categorized in this way? And like doing just a minimum of user research. And I got positive feedback. And I also remember this all hands meeting at Clue where I was like, hey, I'm thinking about that the world needs this term. And, I have an idea for a word, but do you guys have an idea? And somebody said Femtech. I was like, yeah, I'm thinking that too, because we have fintech and we have edtech and so it was just like the most natural, like non-complicated thing I could think of. And somebody else said, I was like, oh, that must be a good word if more people are thinking this. And then I have to give all credit to my ex co-founder and partner, Hans, who said we should do a Wikipedia entry with this and write it down. And we should also trademark it so that it can stay a commons good, so that nobody could take it and kind of monopolize it. So we did that. And, I think the criticism of why is it not just tech and is kind of valid. Like, it would be wonderful if all tech was truly gender informed. But of course it isn't. I mean, that's just the reality. So it helped put focus on a specific part of tech that was or is oriented towards the needs that are specific for people with female biology. And I think it has been helpful. And I think it's totally fine if a term evolve and maybe we need to include something like heart health, which is, present itself differently in women and stuff like that. I don't have any kind of special rights to decide how that term can develop. And one day maybe we don't need it anymore. That's also totally fine. And maybe one day we'll have men take as well, and we'll have things that are specific to men's health that they need more attention to us. Like that, you could also mention that.
And so now, like one description I heard is conditions or symptoms or data that disproportionately affect women, and that encompasses obviously menstruations, but equally fertility. Still very much a female issue. Like we would look at women's fertility before, I think, like 3-4 meetings looking even at the man's fertility. And so, yeah, things that disproportionately affect women. And you touch an interesting point on, should it be called tech? Because we have health, female health, sports, female sports, rugby, female rugby, and tech and female tech. So by opposition, it means that femtech is kind of a subset. And I've heard these criticisms. And also personally, I find it's like being coined as a subterm, whereas, as you say, it would be amazing if all tech was included, like this genderized and being adapted for both genders would be ideal, but we're not there yet. And how do you see the future of tech, or like even like, because it encompasses at a much more broader perspective, which is not only tech, but also health. Like how can we have health that is for both men and women, sports that is actually for both men and women, and not only like the default is the men, and tech being for both. How do you see the future evolving on that?
I think it's important to distinguish. We have a world that was built with a big blind eye to what, who actually populates the planet. That's the problem. We need to include data on women and, in all areas of life. That's how we made tech truly fit the world. So that should be gender informed, not necessarily gender neutral, because we need to look at specific data sets as we do stuff. Like if you build a car, it does matter if you're building for a man and a woman in some respects. So I think that's one part. The other part is that we do have specific needs because of our biology. And I think it's okay that we have a sector of technology that looks at these specific needs. I don't think that is making it smaller that we call that femtech. I think that's just a reality. You know, we have breasts in a way that men don't have breasts. That means we get breast cancer and other things. They can get that too. It's rare. So I would love a future where we have gender informed innovation and we have gender specific innovation, both ends. And I think we are seeing the world becoming more aware of both of these two things. We have all the data showing that it's very smart to include women as we do innovation. That will yield better outcomes and health in the broader sense. And I think that's a concept that I'm really curious about. It's like, how do we think about creating essentially a healthy planet? So all the way from how do we stay healthy to healthy organizations, healthy relations, healthy culture. And tech plays such an important role in that transition from a world that in many ways have been built in ways that are not healthy and not sustainable and culturally not healthy. So I'm excited about the future where femtech can maybe be in some ways like a microcosmos of how we build technology that is gender informed and maybe also building towards health in a broader sense, not just keeping people healthy in a medical sense, but also maybe build organizations that are more diverse and inclusive and being part of forming culture where we can talk about menopause, for instance, as an expression of health.
Yeah, I think also like I haven't seen that in India, but I think I read that Clue also was going into menopause actually, like tracking the symptoms, specifically tackling for menopausal women. That's a very interesting development because the world just seems to wake up to the fact that every single woman on the planet will go through menopause. We might not have a child, but we will all go through menopause. So like being aware of that and like tackling it and making sure we're ready, educated, and have the tools to still appreciate our bodies to the fullest for this like inevitable time of our lives.
Yes, it's a major transition, and there is just an astonishing blindness in culture and lack of information. And also like, where is my predictive analytics for when I'm going to go into menopause? Like, I'd like to know. Why is this a complete black box?
Yeah, surprise. Starting. Going back to your team. So you started with 4 men, and it was you and 4 men, or you and 3 men?
Me and 4 guys.
And 4 guys. And can you tell us a bit the structure of the team who were there? We were very privileged to inherit Mike Lavin, your former CPO at Wells, for a few years, and then he moved on. But can you tell us a bit the structure back then, and then how the team grew and evolved? I know you're based still in Germany. How was like having such an incredible company that has such an incredible audience? Like I think you have 190 countries, if that's correct, with like 10 million users. How was it seen also in Silicon Valley? Like you being based in Germany, was that an issue? And so like more of like the beginnings of those structures.
Yes. So the first co-founder I got was Hans, who was my ex-partner. We have 2 kids together, and he was working in another startup that was maybe going bust or maybe not. But he was like, maybe I should just join your thing. And I was like, okay. We are very complementary, and it definitely was a good thing that he joined. And then I was attending university very briefly. I dropped out. But there was a guy in my class. I was talking about this project, Clue, and the hardware I wanted to build. And then he was like, well, maybe I could help. He was an electrical engineer. I was like, cool. Okay. And then he joined. It was not a very long hiring process. It was like, okay, you can do something. Like, okay, good. I'd take all the help I could get. And then I had a friend who was CEO in a digital agency, and she said, we would like to have a couple of health projects in our portfolio so we could do half-a-day workshop pro bono for you guys. And we were like, okay, cool. And the guy who was leading it was Mike. And I remember we were biking home after that day and saying to Hans, like, wow, imagine if we could have somebody like Mike on our team. We were so impressed. And then we got an email from him saying, hey, I've been a consultant for so many years. I would like to join a startup. Do you know anybody working in health? And we were like, we are. And then he joined. And he was an incredible user researcher, really, as he really put down the foundation of what made Clue successful in many ways. He was also sharing a flat with an amazing graphic designer, Katrin, and she, in many ways, also laid out sort of the rails that Clue, in many ways, visually are still on. So they were very important. And then the last one was, so we were building an app. We had no engineers on the team. That was a challenge. So we found a guy, Daniel Eggert, I think his name was, and he was a Dane. He had worked for Apple 5 years in Silicon Valley, and we hired him. He became a co-founder. And then after 3 months, he was like, guys, I'm earning a fifth of what I earned before. And I just bought this flat. I'm like, this doesn't work. So then he left again.
Yeah.
So yeah, then, teams changed. So over the years, they disappeared until I also disappeared or changed my role. And that's, I think, totally fine. That's how it is. So yeah, we raised some angel capital and hired the first engineers. And then we made one really important hire, which was a very smart American woman been at Howard. And she got us onto influencer marketing for YouTubers, as it was called back then. And she really did a lot for our growth. She's a very, really smart, and she just got everything done. Like, she was like, one of these people who just like get so much shit done. She was amazing. Lisa. And then we got a very random email one day, which was from a guy called Adam Wiggins. And the email basically say, hey, I'm like this super hotshot from San Francisco. I'm an engineer. I just sold my company for a lot of money. Do you want me to come and do something with you guys? And we were like, this is really strange, but okay. And I had a meeting with him and we agreed he would stay a month. And I'm like, when you leave, there's going to be a massive gap in our organization. Like, how are we going to deal with this? Because I could tell he was really, really good. And he came and he spent a month there and he built our first backend and just really lifted the organization. And then eventually he stayed much longer and he was actually interim CEO for a short period when I was out on maternity leave, and became a good friend. So, early, these few people really makes a big difference. And well, actually they keep making a huge difference. We just last year hired a chief product officer who relocated herself and her family from New Zealand, Rhiannon, and she's been amazing. The last person I hired for the management team before I left was our CTO, Greg from Russia, living in Berlin. Also just been an incredible hire. And especially the two of them together, they are just so good. So,
and can you tell me more about maternity? So I have a baby. I took 6 weeks off and it was amazing. But I have many female founders who ask this question, like, how do you deal with it? What was your mental process like going into like maternity, 2 kids? Like, can you tell me more about that? Because I think that's really inspirational for women.
So shortly after I had the idea for Clue, I decided to have a child. And so in Denmark, I then had 1 year maternity leave. So while I was pregnant and on maternity leave, I was kind of starting building Clue, kind of low intensity level. And so from the get-go, the first office we had was our flat. So people would come every day to our flat. And it was a flat with a baby in it. That was just how it was.
Love it.
And then when I was pregnant with my second child, I was out fundraising, pregnant. And I don't know how it's possible, but when I was then breastfeeding, I was fundraising again. And, we would go to all these fancy places in Silicon Valley and they would kind of lift an eyebrow and be like, oh, we've never had a baby here before. And I was like, well, if you don't like me having a baby, you're probably not the right investor. And eventually we were in New York and I was breastfeeding through the meeting. And I even changed diapers on the floor of this fancy VC's office, because of course they didn't have a changing table somewhere. So I did what I had to do and they invested. And I think in the end, you want to find an investor who's somehow a good value fit. And it was a very honest thing, like coming there with my baby, right? It was like, that's how it was. And Hans, who was, the dad, sitting there also. So there was no hiding neither that we were a couple or had kids. And then I took 4 months off. And then when I came back, I was very lucky. One of my best friends, she said, well, I could come help you with the baby for a while. So she would come to the office every day, and the baby would be there and I would be there. So I could breastfeed, but then she could kind of take care of the baby. And then if there was an issue, I was right there. I could help out. And that worked quite well for some months. And then she needed to do other things. And then trying with another nanny in the office didn't work as well. And then eventually I just took care of the baby myself in the office. And that worked kind of half good till it was a year old, maybe, till my daughter was a year old. And then it was like really too much. And then she went to a kindergarten. But we then wrote down kind of policies around this, and we're like, you can bring your baby to work. If it cries, please go outside with your baby, But I will say my experience is, honestly, it's great for the baby and other employees are fine, but it's really hard for the mother. It's really hard trying to get something done with a baby on your lap. And I'm really happy to say that employees can now take the year off that you can take off at Clue and in Germany. But it also has meant that we have a lot of people who get pregnant at Clue. We have more than statistically should happen.
Okay.
And it's hard. It's hard for the organization. I will be honest. Yeah. It is really hard. And, I don't think Clue needs to do anything different. The problem is that other workplaces are not good enough so that more people seek a place like Clue.
Yeah. And what about the men? Do they also have paternity leave?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they take it?
Yeah.
You see them taking it? Yeah.
They do. And I think it's been a positive to our culture. We would have like a baby chair and a changing table, and people bring their dogs, but also a culture where we can say, hey, like, now it's a bit much. Like, there are also borders and limits to what we can hold as a company.
Yeah.
You need a very open and honest conversation about when is it actually not working.
Yeah.
But yeah. But I would say 6 weeks sounds really short. And
it is. Yeah.
And I think sometimes as women, we forget that we can shape our own work lives, especially as founders. We can shape company cultures. We can say at my company, this is how we're going to do it. And if you don't think that's good, well, you can then find another place that you think is good. This is good. I think this is good. And I sometimes kind of wish that women would know that they have more power to shape their work lives so it fits them.
Yeah. Thanks. That's amazing. And I can imagine like you in the meetings breastfeeding and changing the nappy. I have this image in my head that's like really cool. I'm still breastfeeding, so I'm with her a lot, and it's amazing what women do. And so now the company you raised, I think, like 64 million over time, more than 10 million users. And now you step down as CEO, handing over to 2 women. One has left as well. And what is next for you? Like when you left, I think you were saying like for various reasons you left, and now, it's next.
Well, the first thing that was next was just to say no to everything for an undefined amount of time. And it ended up being 2 years. And then I was curious about kind of going out into the world again. And since I came back out into the world, there's just been so many fun and interesting things opening up as possibilities. And I have sort of, thought about whether investment would be fun, and mentoring, or maybe teaching and consulting, or starting something else. But I really want to finish my book. And I have actually written the book. I just need to get it published. I have an agent, so it's like on its way. But I've been very distracted. So now I'm blocking the next 2 months to only write. So I'll be all heads down again.
So you wrote a book in your previous life on the motorbikes, which was a big success. So can you give us some hints on what is going to be the next one?
Yeah, it seems to be a thing to write a book every 10 years about what I'm doing. No, well, so part of it is sort of the learning and stories from Clue and, the beginning of Femtech, but it's also a book about it's kind of an opinionated book about how I see the role of technology in the world, the responsibility and the possibilities of tech, I believe that we are in the middle of a really big systemic shift. So I'm trying to describe what that's about and how Femtech plays a role into that. Yeah, so it's like a personal and societal critical book.
What's the role in AI for you in the future of Femtech or healthcare?
The role of AI?
Yeah.
I don't know, but I think for sure AI is going to play a big role. And I hope there's so much possibility, and it matters so much what the humans behind the AI are thinking when they build. And I think it's really important that we regulate very cautiously, we regulate for caution, and all the sort of attention about what problem should the AI then solve. We need to really be aware that we don't just replicate the same blindness as we have in culture right now around women's lives in many ways, and across the globe. So I'm hopeful. I also have, if I worry about the future of technology and female health, I worry about artificial wombs. I think that's a really, really scary prospect, which is some sort of ultimate not appreciating how amazing a female body is and how central the capability for creating life is for women. I'm not saying all women have to have children. That's not my point, but we do have a really biological, amazing, and maybe sacred ability to create life. And I think this deep appreciation and understanding of what the female brings to the planet is endangered by the idea that we can make a machine do it. So that, I think that's a really scary prospect. But other than that, I'm very hopeful for the future.
And having been pregnant, I feel like one thing I wasn't raised thinking is that my body is incredible. I never heard this word, like your body is insane, like you create humanity as women. And I think like this knowledge and these wordings are really important. Last two questions. What would be an advice to people, something that you generally tell people to like encourage them to be like more formal and more themselves? And then the second question is 2 life hacks. I know one of your daily hacks, sports hacks. What do you have another one? And if you could share that one.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I think there is a big kind of weird distortion field around what it is to raise venture capital. It's considered something that's like celebrated and sort of prestigious, maybe, but you really do get on a very specific track as a company and kind of you as a founder when you decide to raise venture capital. And it comes with possibilities and opportunities, but it also comes with a lot of downside. And I think we need to help founders early on the journey really, with very clear eyes, understand what the trade-offs are when they raise venture capital, and not make it glossy. It's not glossy. And that's one piece of advice. And this is part of a much larger discussion about how wealth is distributed, who creates wealth, what do we even consider as value creation, how does money create power, how is power being used or misused? Like there's a whole deep conversation there to be had, but maybe just simplify it and be like, only raise capital if that's the only way you can build your company and if that's the lifestyle you want to have.
And your 2 little hacks.
And my 2 little hacks, well, the one hack you're alluding to was because I have to just like bow down to the fact that I don't have an amazing sports routine in my life right now. But I was like, I can do the plank for 30 seconds in the morning and 30 seconds in the evening. It's a 1-minute routine per day. But I have been surprised at how much of a difference that makes. I feel like I'm building muscle and I just feel better in my back and my arms. So it's pretty good.
Yeah, love it.
I might add like a downward dog for like another 10 seconds maybe, but it's a pretty little routine. But it's good. You know what's funny? The other life hack, I never thought of it as a life hack at all, but I was mentoring this group of female entrepreneurs and one man, all building femtech. And one of them asked like, how do you like like, how do you pull through? Or like, what do you do when you're just like really tired and you just like have to keep going? And I really thought for a second, I was like, I sleep. And it was this moment of like, what? It's like, you don't just like take a cold shower or like do 5 push-ups or drink coffee or go to the gym. I was like, I sleep. I think that's a great advances with having small kids. Like I'd fall asleep at 8 every single night, putting them to bed, you know? And I don't know, just I think sleep is really, really essential. Also for your mood, for everything. So.
Love it. It's super actionable as well. Ida, thank you so much. Yeah, exactly. And like sleeping well, putting an emphasis on like making space for it and sleeping well. So drinking less alcohol or making the space for the body to recover. Thank you so much, Ida. It's been incredible having you on the Performance Podcast and super inspiring. And can't wait to read the next book.
No, thank you so much for having me, really, and good luck with the work going forward. I love what you're doing.
Thank you.